Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining another live Future of Work podcast episode. And as you can see, my very special guest today, Frances Frei. She's a Harvard Business School professor and co-author of this book here. Hopefully some people can see it. It's called Unleashed, the Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. And you wrote it with Anne Morris, and I had the chance to read an advanced reader's copy, which was a really awesome book. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the kind words. And it's really a pleasure to be here.
Oh, so we have so much to talk about. But as I always like to do with this podcast, maybe we can jump in with just a little bit of background information about you. How did you get involved with everything that you're doing? You've had the opportunity to work with so many great companies. Where did this all begin?
Yeah, so I think a good plot point is when I joined HBS 20 years ago. So if that's far enough in the past. And I joined there and was in the technology and operations management unit and was studying and reading academic literature. I was really interested in operations. I was really interested in how to make things work and how to make things work better. I pretty quickly came to the conclusion that if it weren't for the pesky humans, operations would work beautifully. And then I got super intrigued by the humans and then realized that the humans were led. And then, so then that took me to leadership aspects, but the technology and the operations have stayed strong. So most of the companies I've worked with have they're either being disrupted by technology or they're digitally native. But everything I do is how to make people and organizations better. It's like that true operations focus.
Very cool. And so I suppose after HBS, you started getting a lot of people reaching out to you from different companies to kind of advise and help them as well.
Yeah, and that started, HBS, one of the missions is to stay very close to practice. If we are going to try to differentiate from any of the other business schools, we try to just be right next to practice. And so through the exec ed classroom, and then as the students I taught got further and further up in their careers, some would ask me to come in and be helpful. And indeed, when I went to Uber, it was a former student asked me to come and have a conversation with the then CEO, Travis Kalanick. And my response was no, because I read the newspaper, and it didn't matter which newspaper it was. But she convinced me that it was worthy of a conversation. She convinced me that she thought he was a very good man, trying to do the right thing and needed help. And he was asking for help. So I said, I'll go. I was suspicious, but I'm devoted to students. So I said, I'll go spend an hour. And I spent 3 days with him. We really just went through everything. And he asked for help in the areas where it occurred to me that those were the areas where I could be helpful and that he also needed help. So after spending a lot of time with him, I then went and spent a lot of time with the company before joining officially on June 1st in 2017. And,
wow. So you were, I guess, full-time. So you were an Uber employee for a while.
I joined as an Uber employee on June 1st, 2017, right in the thick of it. It's hard to imagine, I guess, now, but the company really could have gone either way at the time. And so I left it. I went on leave from HBS and didn't know how long it was going to take and was prepared to stay until we were done. And we were able to turn things around much, much quicker than I expected. So after less than a year, the culture was completely transformed. We had done a massive amount of executive education. The leadership team was working really well together. A new CEO was there, and it felt like my work was done.
Very cool. Yeah, and we'll certainly talk a little bit more about kind of the Uber stuff too. But why don't we jump right into the book? Because right away, one of the first things that you talk about at the beginning of the book is the big assumptions, or one of the big assumptions that people have about leadership, which you say is incorrect.
Yeah.
So what is it that people think about leadership that you think is a little off?
So I think that for the last decade or two, we've spent a lot of time collectively. We have spent a lot of time building leaders up and getting them to inspect themselves, and just really, like, the metaphor is we've just put a mirror in the office of the leader and just said, like, look at yourself and focus on yourself a lot. And Anne and I found that the limits to focusing on yourself are behind us, that leaders don't need any more focus on themselves, that leaders need to focus on other people. Indeed, the definition we use is that leadership is about making other people better, first as a result of our presence, and then in a way that lasts into our absence. And so we're really trying to change the mirror on the wall to a window. And instead of looking at themselves, it's, I want to go and look at others. I want to be, when I walk into a room, I don't want everyone to think of me. I want me to think of everyone else and how I can set up other people. So it really is, it's just like a switch in your mind, but it is a 180-degree switch.
Yeah. So leadership isn't about you, it's about other people.
Yeah. You just said it much quicker and much more briefly than I did.
Well, I think you wrote that actually in the book, or maybe I made it up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I love that. That's that's kind of the crux of the argument, right? Is you want to be a great leader, you focus on other people, not just on yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, if you were to look back at your career or throughout the history of leadership, would you say that leadership has changed much over time?
I would. I think that the scope that any leader has to deal with has just increased dramatically. So a CEO today is dealing with not just the same issues that a CEO, a decade ago was dealing with, but then also, if we take current events, also a global pandemic, also racial injustice, also shareholders from all sides, like customers care. At Uber, what was amazing to me, and one of the reasons I fell in love with the company, is how much of the riders cared about how the drivers were treated. I don't think 10 years ago, one stakeholder was arguing on behalf of another stakeholder. So I think that the leadership of organizations, their scope has really expanded dramatically.
Okay, so the scope has changed. What about as far as like leadership skills or how people think about leadership? Have you seen changes there?
Yeah, I think that you have to really be a generalist today, but having had experiences with deep knowledge. So it's impossible to be a CEO today without deep financial understanding. It's impossible without deep strategic, without deep marketing. So it's much less usual today to have someone who came up general manager. You'll see many more CEOs today where their previous job may have been a CFO. And I think that's less, I think that was less common in the past.
Okay. So leadership, you definitely, and I agree. I even in my book, I found that to be the case from a lot of the CEOs I interviewed. They would say, there's some things that are the same, but there are also a lot of things that are very, very different. Yeah. So things have definitely changed. So you mentioned some of what's going on today, and by the time most people are listening to the audio version of this, it'll be a few weeks after the current events. But for those of you watching live, you can see, obviously it's live. But those of you listening right now, the protests around George Floyd are going on. Still the coronavirus, the pandemic is going on. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit, Francis, and what you think that means for leaders as well.
Yeah. So I think that this moment in time, so the stuff around George Floyd, which is, we all saw the murder of someone. What's different about it than all of the other instances of this that have been far too common, at least in the United States, is that for whatever reason, we all seem to be sharing the same breath, the same video screen. Like all of us experienced it at the same time. We had pretty similar experiences. I don't know if that's because we're just coming out of but we're in the midst of a global pandemic that is affecting all of us around the world in pretty similar ways.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, we were ready to experience this at the same time. And so that's been quite extraordinary to me. And then one of the things we talk about in the book is that, like, our job is to make other people better. And we will win if we can make more and more varied people better. And so the more varied, that was our way of making, really calling inclusion and diversity as strong competitive advantage levers. And then we see this incredible racial injustice going on, and it puts even a sharper focus on it. So one of the things we talk about is, what does inclusion mean? And we use an inclusion dial, and it goes that, like, despite any difference I represent, white or black, like if I'm black in a sea of white employees, I will feel included if I first feel safe, regardless of any difference I represent. If I then feel welcome, regardless of any difference I represent. And then it turns the corner to competitive advantage if I'm celebrated precisely because of the difference I represent. And then if I'm cherished in every corner of the organization. Well, I have to say, what's different today than even when we wrote the book is that safety part, we used to skip over pretty quickly. I mean, I would use a story of how I got asked from HBS if I would go and teach in a Middle Eastern country, and I said no because it was illegal to be gay there. And I didn't feel safe. And the senior leadership at the school at the time said, "Oh, you don't have to worry about that. They're going to roll out the red carpet for you." And I was like, no. There's no amount of welcome that makes up for safe. That's right. So, well, we are seeing like the lack of safety, all of us today. And here's what we know. If I'm feeling unsafe, it's not up to me to fix the situation. It's up to you if you're feeling safe. And if you're feeling unsafe, it's up to me. And so when we see all of this racial injustice, I think what we're learning now, look at the amazing CEOs that are stepping up from every organization that we can imagine, all saying, we are now going to take action. Like race is not a Black person's problem. Gender is not a women's problem. Like we are now going to take action on behalf. And honestly, we're tragically sorry. And this is one of the other things that we've learned is that if you want successful change, I only ever see it work when three things occur. And we now need successful change based on this George Floyd moment and all of the surrounding. But it's when we honor the past, when we have a clear and compelling change mandate, and when we have a rigorous and optimistic way forward. Well, if we look at race in the United States, we have never really honored the past. And when we don't honor the past in an organization, and you'll see like somebody wants to change something, those that were here before you are just going to Godfather, like keep pulling you back unless we honor the past. We need to do that. We have the clear and compelling change mandate. And now we need a super rigorous and a very optimistic way forward. And I think this is a call to people that are at the heads of organizations. If you're going to lead an organization today, you have to have rigor and optimism, or you probably should step aside for someone else to come in and do it. Yeah. A very long answer to an awesomely short question.
No. I love those three criteria. Maybe we can unpack those a little bit because sure. I think those are very applicable in a business setting, because all the time people are talking about driving change and wanting change to happen. And I've heard so many stories of leaders who end up making change happen. And then, maybe 1, 2, 3 years later, another leader comes in and they want to change everything that other leader changed.
Yes.
And it's just this nonstop cycle of like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't even know what to call it, but it's just revolving.
Yeah. And I think, and that's exactly right. And so what we have found is that if you want sustainable change, if you come in and honor the past, it calms down people that were there before you. And I think they're going to be there after you, by the way. Yeah. It calms people down that you're not just bringing this worked over here, so now I'm going to apply it here. Because our context is different. When you honor the past, you're honoring the context. And I think that's really important. So one of the things when I got to Uber, it was, there were some people that were super, super mad at Travis. And that is like their right. But it was no way we were going to change Uber if we didn't honor the amazing early history of Uber and everything that happened up until that really tragic blog where Susan Fowler exposed to everyone the horrible sexual harassment and mismanagement that was going on. So I've never seen change take hold without honoring the past as an organization or as a society. But I've seen lots of people who come in, to your point, and they want to say, I'm a change agent, so I'm going to come in and do everything different. No. This is, again, our definition of leadership is to make people better as a result of your presence and have it last into your absence.
Yes.
You too are going to be part of the past. So you got to honor the past.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about how that works. I don't know if you have any real life examples or stories of what honoring the past looks like. Is it, you call an all hands meeting and you just say, hey, I know this is what happened before. It was great. Thank you for doing that. But now we're going this way. Or what does that actually look like?
So I think honor looks like really sincere and really specific, detailed, nuanced, talking about the past again and again and again, not as a history lesson, but we're doing this. Some of you will remember that we did this before. Here's what happened. Here's what the awesome people did. It's when we honor the past, I want us to learn the lessons, blame no one, and I want to celebrate individuals. So I want to credit lots and lots and lots of individuals. And if I have anything bad to say about the past, it's not individuals, it's we as a collective, and here are the lessons that we learned from it. So being a student of the past, but with understanding that it is fueling progress. So I'll give you an example. When I was at HBS, and we were turning around the culture at HBS, we had the HBS case method, and then we introduced the Hbs Field Method. So the whole history of HBS had been large group discussion. And we introduced small group experiential. Some people were horrified that we would think of doing it. We could have come in and been very clumsy and said, oh, this is the new way. And we would still be relitigating it if we had done that. Instead, we came in, we're like, look, this is a compliment. Turns out that we want more and more varied people to thrive. Only some people thrive on day one of the case method. If we give them small group experiential, that will help more people find their voice in various ways. And then that will make the case method better. We didn't put down anything to make ourselves look good. We just really showed ourselves as a compliment. And I think that's what we want to do.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me of honoring your just personal history, culture, where you came from, family. Even some of family members might not necessarily be alive, or the past, obviously not the present, but you can still talk about it and relive, tell stories, and make it relevant in today's world.
And I would say if you're trying to change, that is an absolutely necessary criteria. Okay. Because otherwise, the people from the past will pull you back to the past again and again, and they'll wait you out. You'll leave, and they'll just reverse it immediately.
Okay. All right. So that was the first step: is honor the past.
Yeah.
And the second step was
you have to have a clear and compelling change mandate. Essentially, answering the question, "Why now?" You want to change. Why do I have to change right now? Can't I change later? Because no one is going to come knocking at your door under normal circumstances and say change. Now, that's one of the amazing things that's going on now. All around the U.S., everyone is knocking on people's doors saying change now. We should take advantage of that. We have a clear and compelling change mandate. For Uber, the press provided a clear and compelling change mandate. Investigative journalists made it so, you read the newspaper, the company had to change.
Yeah.
Normally, that's the hardest thing for a company to come up with, because if things are going well, how do you convince people that we should change right now? What I normally say is, if you can't do it on one page with a lot of the page taken up by figures, you're not going to be able to do it. So show me that, this number used to be going up and it's now going down. Or show me something that is super compelling. Otherwise, people will have other things that they would prefer to have as their top priority.
So how do you go about doing that, sort of creating that compelling I guess, vision or change mandate? Where do you begin?
Yeah, so I think that listen, if Walmart opens up next door, you have it, right? If you're a retailer and everybody sees it. I think right now we're having protests. We saw the murder of someone in the streets. We have a clear and compelling mandate. But let's say you're a company and things are going well, but you foresee the future. And I think this is one of the reasons that Jack Welch was so celebrated at GE as a great CEO, is that when the company was doing well, he instituted massive change. The real amazing part of that is that he gave people a clear and compelling reason why if we weren't number one or number two in every market we served, our future is in grave jeopardy. And he convinced people of that by talking about it in various ways all the time. So I think if Walmart doesn't open up next door, you have a bigger job to do of doing it. But if I don't walk around with like a fast-paced pulse, you're not going to get my entire heart and soul into the change.
It's funny that you mentioned Jack Welch, because I feel like a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with him, where I've heard several people say he was one of the greatest leaders. And then there are other, maybe I won't mention any names, but there are other authors out there who have called him a bastard, who've said he's the first one who created mass layoffs. And if it wasn't for him, companies wouldn't be doing that today. So it's really weird to hear kind of like.
And I can't add to either. I mean, those are both, I'm sure, informed points of view. I'm not a student of that. I wouldn't come out either way. But here's the thing I think nobody will argue with. He instituted change when it didn't appear like it was necessary.
Yeah.
No question that he did that. And I have to tell you, when the organization was close to being on top, he instituted change. Now, some people are going to say the bastard, and some people are going to say, but there isn't any question that he did it, and he created out of his mind a clear and compelling change mandate because he saw the future and was terrified for it. And then he found a way to make that effective in the present. Now, again, whether or not he should have or not, I'll leave that up to other scholars.
What does a compelling change mandate look like? Is it a couple sentences? Is it something that is about fear, or is it hope, or like if you have any guidelines?
Well, the hope comes in the optimistic way forward. It's okay to have a little bit of fear in the clear and compelling change mandate, which is, our revenue went off a cliff, a new entrant, new regulation, a new technology has changed the landscape. So something that is disrupting what's going on. So we have the good old days, and then something is disrupting that, because otherwise we should just keep in the honored past. So like, why do we have to change? I think that's but if you can't describe it super crisply, then, and like with one page, people are going to really just argue for the past. They're going to say, please. Yeah.
Okay. And I suppose this is also true for individuals, because, it's one thing to change your company, but a lot of the times leaders need to change themselves. Yeah. They need to learn new things, embrace new skills and mind, or even just as individuals, we need to,
In fact, here's what I'd say. I don't care about the leaders quite so much as I want the leaders to help develop their people.
Yeah.
And so they're going to want to inject a change, a reason to change inside their people. I'm not as concerned about the leader. But the development of people is our greatest asset in any company. But convincing people, why should we learn new skills? Now, it's easier. Golly, I should probably learn how to code today, even if I'm not going to code, because the whole world is based on that rigorous if then else statement. And so I should do it. So helping people realize why they should be developed, I think is a great thing to do.
What about just individuals who are not leaders? Because a lot of the times people are like, I should do something different, I should learn something new, but they don't have that compelling, just personal change mandate.
Yeah, and I think if you don't have the clear and compelling mandate, it's like willpower, and I'm just not sure that willpower is all that generally. I'm not sure willpower is scalable.
Okay, so you do need a little bit of willpower to be able to make change happen yourself.
I think so. I think the clear and compelling change mandate makes the need for willpower go down. It's all willpower if you don't have a good change mandate. Got it.
Okay. I thought maybe we could shift gears a little bit. I know a lot of people are very, very fascinated with Uber, and probably want to hear a little bit more about like the inner workings of, what exactly did you do there? Why did they bring you in? Yeah. So can you share a little bit about, first, maybe why were you brought into Uber? And maybe you can give some context around what is it that you did to try to change Uber for the better?
Sure. And I think that, we had just finished doing a turnaround of the culture at HBS. And so HBS had a long history of having demographic tendencies associated with the students that would thrive. So men had higher grades, men had higher self-reported satisfaction than women, as one example.
Okay.
We set out to change that, and were able to close all of those gaps in a year. Importantly, it has lasted several leaders since then. So to your point, it didn't stop with the next people that came in and the next people that came in. Although at some point, I think there is a statute of limitations. Maybe after 4 or 5 leaders, it has to be redone. And what we learned there is that we closed the gap in satisfaction between men and women, but the satisfaction of men went up as well. So there was like a 35-point gap on a scale of 100. So the women got a lot more satisfied, and the men also became more satisfied. And so we had learned, so I had been coaching companies how to do it, but this was the first time I did it as a leader. And by I mean a team, but it's the first time I participated in it, instead of advising people. And so that had just happened. And then the challenges that Uber had were on culture and different people thriving, for sure, on gender side. And so that's why they asked if I would come in, is because I had been successful at advising, and then I had done it once. And so when I got there, the first thing I did was first look to see, are there bad people here? Because then I don't want to stay. And if you notice, what happened in Uber is we separated from 20 people in June of 2017. There were almost 15,000 employees. So the number of, bad fits was like a 2 small handfuls, which is super unusual. It's not, if I read the newspaper, it looked like there were going to be thousands. It wasn't thousands. But here's the insight that we had. Of all of the complaints that came in, because once the Susan Fowler blog came out, Uber, and I wasn't there yet, they called me after it, but they opened up every channel and this is what the company does. After there's a crisis, the hotline, the app, the phone, the Ask Me Anything meetings, you just surface from everywhere all of the problems. And of all of the problems that were surfaced, well over 90% had to do with a person and their manager. There were 3,000 managers at Uber. So there were either 3,000 bad people, or Uber was doing something systematically to not set managers up for success. It very quickly found out that it was the latter. And here's what was going on. You get hired as an individual contributor, and then the company was growing so fast that 5 minutes later, you get promoted to a manager. You didn't have any, and then 5 minutes after that, by the way, a manager of managers. Turns out that management is a skill that can be taught, but no one was teaching folks. So we had to teach people how to manage, how to give effective feedback, how to set goals, all of the basics, including then how to be inclusive, how to set people up for success. So that was one part, is that it was clear that managers were at the tip of the spear of where the problems were, but it wasn't their fault, and education would solve it. So we go ahead.
I was going to say, I love that you mentioned that. So here I have a copy. So this is my new book, which came out just a couple months before yours.
Oh, good. Congratulations. It's beautiful, by the way.
Oh, I had a designer do this one.
Yeah.
So I found a lot of the same stuff that you found in your book. So I interviewed 140 CEOs and surveyed 14,000 people with LinkedIn. And I found a lot of the same stuff to be true. And one of the big challenges I found is that a lot of, a few things. First, a lot of leaders thought they were doing a very good job of practicing the necessary skills and mindsets required to be good leaders. But the people who worked for these leaders said that their leaders were doing a terrible job of practicing them.
Of course. Yeah.
And then the second thing I found is that most people actually don't get into any kind of leadership training until being in the prime in their career. Yeah. You don't get into leadership training until you're in your late 30s, early 40s, but you become a leader at some point in your mid to late 20s, your first time being a leader.
Line managers were everything at Uber in terms of the experience people were having. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
suppose it's because most people think that you can only get leadership or management training for the exclusive few after you've kind of climbed the corporate ladder, which is
It's
insane.
crazy. And so if we debunk that myth in this hour, that would be amazing.
Yes, I think everybody should have the leadership and the management training.
Right.
Like, why wouldn't you want everybody to have these skills and mindsets?
But if you look at when we got to Uber, for example, it's 3,000 people in like over 100 countries.
Yeah.
So now you have to, so you can't go and like do it in person. So then here's the amazing technological thing. And this is like the amazing part of Uber, and they partnered with HBS, and it's an amazing part of HBS. HBS had a studio. They still have the studio. It's called the HBX Live Studio. And there's 60 screens in this studio. And if I, as a faculty member, go in there, you can log in from anywhere around the world. You get your whole entire screen. It, after 5 minutes, will feel like we're all in one classroom together. It's amazing. That already existed. But when I went to Uber and I was like, oh my gosh, there's 3,000 people around the world. I said to HBX Live, look, I know you're optimized for 60 people, but we want to teach 2,500 people at a time. Will you? And they were like, nope, we're optimized for, I was like, look, we'll take all the technological risk. HBS is so good at perfection. We were like, we will take the risk. So the tech team at Uber partnered with the tech team at HBS, which was thrilled to innovate. And then we learned how to do it with 60 people live, but then 2,500 people who we called in the Sky Deck who could observe and have their own chats. It was amazing. We did reflections from everyone. Everyone learned the same amount from 1 to 2,500. So then now education is no longer a problem. Now you can educate the front line, because I couldn't fly in 3,000 people, or it would be like I'd have to turn things off, but we could do this, for 4 hours from 7 to 11 at night, or from 9 to 12. In fact, Uber was so committed to this that we held every class repeated 3 times so that we could do it in convenient time zones for everyone around the world. Because one of the problems Uber had before is that they didn't reveal as much empathy as they needed to. Neither to the drivers nor to the employees in all instances. And by our saying to people in Asia, look, the HBS faculty got up at 2 a.m. to teach them. HBS faculty had never gotten up at 2 a.m. before.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And you know what? HBS faculty thought it was the most amazing group of students they learned. And I still think it's the greatest learners I've ever been around. They just were so grateful. And the need for the language was, the need for the education was so palpable to them that they soaked it in. And so we did leadership and strategy to great effect in that.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you were teaching these leaders?
Sure. Yeah. So listen, at Uber, the first thing I saw when we got there is trust had broken down with various stakeholders. Class 1, how do you build and rebuild trust? Because and that's why we open the book with trust. If you don't have a foundation of trust, nothing else I'm going to teach you in leadership is going to matter. So it's not about you, how to build and rebuild trust. That was the first thing we taught. The next thing we taught is, how do you set one other person up for success? Just one person. We use stories from ancient Rome. In the book, we call it love, but it's really, how do I get the best out of you? And that's by having high standards and deep devotion. And there's challenges because sometimes we think they trade off and they don't. But we taught them how to set one other person up for success. So you could do each of your direct reports one at a time. Then it got super fun. How do you set a team of people up for success? And what is the best composition of a team? And what we found, and I'm sure it's what you found as well with your work, is that we're really good when the golden rule applies. So for the subset of the world that I can treat them exactly how I want to be treated, that's like easy leadership. But the second we introduce variation so that the golden rule is a terrible idea, because I shouldn't treat you how I want to be treated. I should treat you how you want to be treated. I was just lucky when we were in common. So then we got into the composition and how to build a really robust team and how to bring out the best of the team. And we had Amy Edmondson come in, who was like the foremost authority on teams, and Sadal Neely would come in and she would teach about globalization. It was just all amazing. So that was the leadership part. And then we taught people in leadership, okay, given our global context, at the time, inequality was the biggest thing that was going on. So we were like, in the context of inequality, when we're in this global company, what's the right way? Like, what's the right way to lead given our context? Today, it would be in the midst of a global pandemic and also in the midst of a racial injustice. So those were the specific things we taught on leadership. And also, also, how do you design a culture to guide discretionary behavior? So we spent a lot of time on how to design and shepherd a culture. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask if was there like a specific emphasis on certain skills or mindsets like emotional intelligence or?
There was, but it was embedded in these tools. So in order to build trust, you have to have authenticity, logic, and empathy. So we taught authenticity, logic, and empathy within those skills. When you're setting someone else up for success, you need to create the conditions for them to be vulnerable. It doesn't mean I have to be vulnerable, although that is one technique. But I have to set the conditions so that you can be vulnerable. So we focused on each of these. They were emotional and logical. I guess those were the two parts. It was a set of skills and a set of emotions that we were bringing out in people.
Okay, makes sense. And these were, these were ongoing classes, I guess, in person and virtual for.
Yeah. We piloted in person, but then the main education, because of the distributed company, was all done through this studio. So here's what we did. We designed like a 30-hour curriculum, something like that. We said, we're going to pilot this 30-hour curriculum over 60 days. Which is insane. Like, imagine like you're doing your job and then over 60 days, you're going to take 30 hours of a super rigorous curriculum.
Yeah.
We thought of the, between 10 and 15,000 employees, a couple hundred would sign up. 6,000.
Wow.
6,000. So I had made the mistake of saying, look, after every class, feel free to write a reflection and I will respond to your reflection. I got 30,000 reflections. I was like, oh my gosh. I thought I was going to get a few hundred reflections. Yeah. So we piloted it, but it's now going on in its like third year, and we did the first year, and then there were graduation sessions of going after that. So it's, and that's the thing I'm really impressed with you. No matter what challenges they're going through, they're still investing in the development of their people. This is a place where they've honored the past, and they are not going to go back to learning those lessons again.
Okay, very cool. So I don't know if you can see on the screen. There's this this question that came in from Scott. And I'll read it because those who are obviously not live.
Yeah.
He says, I like to believe I've always been good with change until I went from being an independent contributor to being a leader being a leader overnight. And one of the biggest challenges I encountered with this change was going from being the doer to the leader. And the ability to step back from the day-to-day operations and lead my team was the hardest change for me in the process. Have you encountered this before, and what advice would you give to someone experiencing this issue now? So how do you go from being the doer to the leader?
Yeah, and Scott, this is so good. So when it's all about me, I might think that, well, let me do it. But if it's all about you and your development, I'm never going to try to do it for you. I'm going to try to develop you because I know that the collection of you can accomplish way more than I can as an individual contributor. So the first thing to do is if someone is doing something not as well as you want, resist all temptation to do it yourself. Imagine a world where you can't possibly do it for yourself. So the best thing you can do is develop people and help make them better so that they collectively can accomplish much more than you can. So it's he was a great doer. Pretend you're no longer a great doer and you're now the coach. You're no longer allowed out on the court. The only thing you can do is coach. The good news is it's not just 5 people on the basketball court. You can have more and more and more people.
Yeah. So, and I struggle with that too sometimes, Scott. So I have a small team of 10 people that I work with. And sometimes I see somebody doing something and I'm like, oh my God, like you're going to make my head explode. I could just go in there and fix it. And I'm like, all right, just don't do it yourself. Just communicate with them and have them.
10 people, like at 10 people, you're kind of close to maybe being able to do it yourself. But if you imagine, I'm going to have 100 people or 200 people or 500 people, and that's the world you want to imagine, because as you go on in your career, that's likely what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Great question, Scott.
Yeah, Scott, great question. Hopefully that piece of advice works there. So just pretend like you're trapped behind a force field, and you can't be the
Yes.
doer. You got to be the coach. I
Yes.
like that advice very much. Okay, so jumping back to Uber, did you find that, or even just in general, Uber, some of the other companies that you worked with, is there some stuff that you have done for leaders which did not work? So anything that failed?
Yeah, I'll tell you a big one that failed was that, so when I got to Uber and then to other companies that had broken cultures, I would look at their cultural values, and these were companies that were really led by their cultural values. So like cultural value A, people would do things and say hashtag that cultural value. Like these are like really culture-driven organizations. And when the culture was broken, what would happen is some of the cultural values would be weaponized. So my favorite example is a cultural value that's default to trust, which is a beautiful cultural value, right? It's saying, let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. It's like exactly how a company and a society should work. When it gets weaponized, that means that people are using it for reasons other than let's give it the benefit of the doubt. In fact, what happened was more senior people would want to stop junior people from questioning them. And so they'd say, default to trust, dude. like stop questioning. That's not benefit of the doubt. That was, repurposing it for your own selfish needs, what we call weaponizing. I thought in the beginning, if the cultural value was a good value, we simply needed to re-communicate its intent. So we just had to remind people that default to trust really meant, no, it's supposed to be used for this. It's supposed to be used to give the benefit of the doubt. Absolutely doesn't work. There is no amount of re-education. Once a cultural value has been weaponized, let it go and come up with new cultural values. And this time, don't have it from the founder handed on down, but develop them from everyone. So I participated a lot in the re-education because I thought the cultural values were beautiful. And I was like, yeah, that shouldn't be weaponized. As soon as it's weaponized, it's on the other side of the force field, to use your earlier analogy.
When you say weaponized, what, so I guess somebody using the value as a way to...
For me to get my own way. So like if you're questioning me and I don't want to be questioned, I would say, look, just default to trust. That wasn't the intent of default to trust.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. At Uber had a very famous one of toe stepping. And that was meant that if you have a good idea and you're being silenced by your manager, it's okay to step on your manager's toes to surface the idea up in the organization, because we never want to lose a good idea. Well, some people started stepping on the toes of people going down the organization.
Oh, I see. So your recommendation in that case is if somebody is, or if you find that the value is being weaponized, you just get rid of the value altogether.
You can't, there's no amount of re-education. And that took me a long time. That took me too long to learn. Okay. There's no amount of re-education that will work.
Even if people are like, oh, it's such a great value. Like you said, default to trust, that sounds like a wonderful value.
Once it's been weaponized, there is no reclaiming it.
Done. Give it up.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I think that's a great one. I think in the book you also have something called the trust triangle.
Yeah.
So I thought we could talk about that because I love that visual. And then you also have like this wobble factor, which I thought was a really great way to visualize what that is. So can you talk about that triangle?
Sure. So what we learned is that when trust is broken, or when you want to build trust as a monolithic thing is super hard to move. But when we learned that there are 3 component parts to trust: authenticity, logic, and empathy, what became really cool about that is not only did we know its 3 component parts, but each one of those is very actionable. So I don't know how to move trust, but I know how to overcome a challenge in authenticity. I know how, if somebody's doubting my logic, I know how to overcome that. If someone's doubting my empathy, I know how to overcome that. So when we do this exercise with people, we ask everyone, please imagine a time, and I've done this in rooms with 5,000 people and rooms with 5 people. And if you don't mind, let's do it with you live right now.
Sure, let's do it.
All right. So I'm going to say to you, you're trusted most of the time, right? You're well respected. You're awesome. You write great books.
I don't know about any of those things.
So here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and this is going to be a little hard, and you're doing it live, but I think it's going to go well. Bring up into your mind's eye a recent time when you didn't experience as much trust as you were trying to. So you're trusted most of the time, but when was a time when people didn't trust you, either a person or people, and we're going to call them your skeptics. Maybe it was, so put that in your mind's eye. I don't even need to know what it is, but have it in your mind's eye. Could have been at home, could have been at work, could have been anywhere. So then I'm going to give you 3 choices to identify what got in their way of trusting you. Was it that they doubted that you were being the real you? Because if you're delivering a message that you don't believe in, we sniff that out in a second and we don't trust you. Or did they think your idea wasn't very good? So that's why I don't trust you. Like I'm not giving you the steering wheel. Your logic didn't feel rigorous enough. Or did they feel like you were being too self-distracted? This was all about you. I don't feel like you're in it for me. So was it authenticity, logic, or empathy that got in the way?
I don't think it was authenticity, because I think people would say that I'm usually pretty authentic, I hope. I think usually and I get this a lot, for example, and you probably might as well online with like social media stuff. I share an idea, share an article, put something out there, and it's very easy for people to kind of bombard you with negativity and just, this is garbage, this doesn't make any sense. And I think usually people critique the idea. I haven't had so much around authenticity. I don't think around empathy. I think usually.
So it's the logic. Great. So let's narrow in. So let's narrow in on this. So then in our language, we would say you have a logic wobble. That is, wobble is what's getting in the way of your skeptics trusting you. Good news, we know first of all, we know how to overcome any of them, but you got to know which one it is for us to overcome it. So now we just have to double click one more time on logic. When people doubt my logic, they can doubt it for one of 2 reasons. Either I don't have very good logic and people are seeing that super clearly. There's a substance problem. Or I have really good logic. I'm just communicating it ineffectively. That's a style problem. Yeah. The reason you have to know if it's substance or style is the prescriptions are very different. One doesn't apply to the other. So what we would do, we would then say, is it substance or is it style? And then we would teach you how to overcome either of them.
Got it. Okay. So really figuring it out. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking of another situation where this happens. So, one of the things that, and you probably do this as well, when you teach courses. So I have some like online courses that I've created over the past. And sometimes some courses will do really, really well. And sometimes other courses, regardless of how hard you try to get people to sign up for them, they don't do well. And then you try to figure out, is it like the messaging? Is it because the way I'm communicating the value of the course isn't there? Is it because people don't think the course aligns with who I am? So that happened. I've had that experience.
Yeah.
For
sure. And what I would say is there's not one generic way to improve a course. You have to really get down to the micro diagnose. But here's the cool thing about trust. We now know all of its component parts. We know how to get to the root of all of it. And we can give you we do give you very specific prescriptions for how to overcome it. So we haven't met someone who wants to build more trust who hasn't been able to. But here's where we have failed. I can't create in you the desire to build more trust. So when someone says, go help that person be more trusted, I can't. I can only, if somebody comes to me and say they want, I can't, it's got to be pull. It doesn't work in push.
Got it. Okay. So you talk about all 3 of those wobbles in the book. And yeah. I suppose you can have several wobbles at the same time. I mean, you can,
but we find that you typically have one in any short duration. I mean, you can, and we can help overcome them. But usually if you have a logic problem, and let's say it's a communicative problem about logic, it's usually that over a bunch of, that just keeps repeating itself. And we have really great prescriptions for how to overcome it.
Okay. Got it. The other thing that I liked in the book, you have these 4 quadrants for leadership profile. And I thought this would be useful for people who are watching or listening. Maybe we can go through those quadrants so that people can identify which area they fit in.
Yeah. So if as a leader, I'm trying to set another person up for success, there's 2 levers I have to do it. I have to set high standards. Very few people thrive in the absence of high standards. So I need to set high standards. I also need to reveal that I'm deeply devoted to your success. So if you imagine a 2x2, because this is going to be our quadrants of low to high standards on the vertical axis and deep devotion and low devotion on the horizontal axis. Here's the challenge. We all know that we want to set high standards and have deep devotion. But most of us, when we set high standards, we don't reveal that we're devoted to people. In fact, we get a little chilly. We get a little distance from people. And when we do show our deep devotion, we tend to insidiously lower the standards. So the quadrants, the name of the quadrants are, if I have high standards and low devotion, I'm in a position of severity. My reaction to being in a position of severity, I set high standards for you, but you didn't feel I was devoted to your success. And then I get feedback that I was a little chilly. And so then I scramble to really deep devotion and low standards. That's a position of fidelity. And a lot of us spend a lot of our time going back and forth between severity, and fidelity. When I learn how to break out of that, that's when I get to justice. And high standards and deep devotion puts us in a place of justice. And the missing link, to your point of the 4, is that if I have low standards and low devotion, that's neglect. And it's interesting to think, who in your life are you neglecting right now?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was looking at this quadrant for a while, actually, to see where I might fit in, or I suppose not even where I think I fit in, but where other people would think I fit in. That's
exactly the question. And
probably more interesting.
Yeah, and I think what we tell people is you're not done the exercise until you can fill people in your life in every one of those quadrants. All of us has the ability to be in every one of those quadrants. And as a leader, we want you to be able to move into the quadrant of justice whenever you want. So you might not want to be in high standards, deep devotion for someone, but if you do, we give you the tools to get there no matter what your starting point.
Okay. Got it. Which, I mean, the justice quadrant, I suppose, would probably be the best one for people to be in. So part of this, you talked a little bit about empathy earlier. So I thought maybe we could touch a little bit on empathy and self-awareness, which I think are pretty important factors. I think you've talked about them in your book as well. But it seems like that's essential for making any of this stuff happen.
I do. So if trust is the foundation, which I think trust is the foundation, empathy is one of the 3 parts of trust. So if you can't reveal if people doubt your empathy, you're just not going to be able to do very much. Yeah. And the way to think about whether you're going to doubt my empathy. So I went to Uber, and one of the most astonishing things I saw when I was I went and was facilitating the senior team in between the Memorial Day to Labor Day when there was the CEOs weren't there. One of the most amazing things I saw is, one, while we were having a meeting, people were texting. That's not good, and because you're showing that you're self-distracted and you're saying, I am more important to you. Then I found out that people were texting one another in the meeting. That's gone from not good to super toxic, because now you're making it unsafe for everyone else. So we agreed, and we came up with a norm that we put technology off and away while we're there. But go into a meeting today, and you can see this on Zoom. If people are present to other people, if I'm here for you and you can feel it, that's empathy. If I'm looking down, and now you told me before this meeting that you were going to be, because you're multitasking.
I'm looking at questions and comments, yes.
Yeah, so you're doing it on purpose. But let's say that we didn't know that. And each time you were looking away, we thought that you were doing something selfishly about you. The first thing to go would be trust, because we would see a lack of empathy. You can see the presence and absence of empathy in a meeting in about 180 seconds.
Wow.
So what it means for individuals is, I encourage you not to bring extra technology into meetings, because it is super hard not to be lured into being self-distracted. And self-distraction is the enemy of empathy.
And there's, people always need to differentiate. And I talk about this too, the difference between hearing and listening, where hearing is just the unconscious act of letting sound enter your ear. But listening is, like you said, practicing empathy, being there, present, aware, making the conversation feel collaborative.
Definitely doesn't happen when you're also on an iPhone.
No. I mean, we've all had that experience, right? Where you look at somebody and they're looking back at you, but you could just mentally tell that they're who knows where they are in their head, but you got the eyes.
Yeah, you got the eyes. What I'd say is they're not going to bring out the best in you. They are abdicating their position of leadership. Yeah.
Yep. So we only have a couple minutes left, so I have maybe one or two questions for you.
Sure.
So first is, do you have any advice for people who might be thinking, okay, I work for or with a bad leader?
Yes.
What do I do?
Oh, great. So what you do is buffer that bad leader from everyone else. So that's the first thing is that, so like if they're your leader, please, your choices are you can dampen their effects of badness, keep them neutral, or amplify. Buffer, like dampen how bad they are so that you can absorb as much of it as possible.
So you got to take one for the team, so to speak.
I think definitely. And I'm going to make it even harder. And you're not allowed to throw them under the bus as you do it.
Ooh, okay. So don't say anything bad about the leader.
No, if you do that, people aren't going to trust you because they're going to doubt your empathy. It's just going to be in a different direction.
But you also don't need to praise them to make it look like you're kissing up.
No, because then you'll lack authenticity.
Okay, so shield them from, or shield their effect. Okay, so you shield their effect, but they're still a bad leader. They're still driving you nuts. They're still toxic. They're still negatively impacting you. Do you quit? Do you try to work with them?
Oh, I wouldn't. Quitting is a long way down the road. So first of all, try to diagnose why are they a bad leader, and is it that they don't care? Is it substance or style? Is it that they don't care, or they do care but they're having a communication problem? And then here's the way to bring out the best in someone. Give sincere and specific praise when they're being a good leader. Don't bring up when they're being a bad leader. Just give sincere and specific. Oh my gosh, in the meeting yesterday, the team was on fire afterwards, and it was after you said this and this. It's after you did this and this. Give people a chance to know what they should do repeatedly. So educate them as a result of giving positive reinforcement of what you want them to do more and more of. That's usually very effective.
Would you confront your leader?
I don't give constructive advice until I have a very big reservoir of positive reinforcement.
Okay.
So if you're going to give constructive advice, and that's very different than confront, I don't really believe in confrontation, but if you're going to give someone advice to act differently to get a different outcome, I think the ratio has to be at least 5 to 1. So every piece of constructive advice I want to give, I have to already have given 5 pieces of positive reinforcement.
Okay. So I like that idea of a reservoir. So think of it sort of like, like a tip jar or a swear jar, where you got to wait for that jar to get full before you can sort of take it out and take the credit in for the one.
I'm not giving you positive reinforcement that's super sincere and specific. What I'm also saying is I see you.
Yeah.
Like I really see you. And if I really see you, you will start to open to constructive advice.
Okay. So 5 to 1 ratio. Good. Yeah. From a lot of the organizations that you've worked with, from the leaders that you've advised, what would you say some of the toughest challenges are? Is it always about trust and psychological safety? Is that what they struggle with the most?
I think they struggle with the most that it's about them. It's not about you. Trust, you're bringing up psychological safety, which is the Fearless Organization is a magnificent book written by Amy Edmondson, which is just like, get that book. And then I think that your other point of delegation, like my job is to set you up for success, which means I'm going to take the blame and I'm going to give you the credit. Yeah. So, and if you think about the leader, like look at how the pandemic has played out. I think like if you look at the countries that have done well in the pandemic and look at the leaders, you can line it up between leaders that it was about them to leaders when it wasn't about them and their success in the pandemic. I think if you look at it, like we have the whole range going on in 2020 around the world. I think that it's hard for some people to make it not about them. For some people, it's supernatural. So.
Yeah, it's very weird. All right, and very last question for you. And this is more around things that leaders can do for their people. So there are a lot of leaders who listen to the podcast. Let's say they just finished listening to this episode and they're thinking, all right, I'm going to take some of Frances's advice. I want to become that better leader. I want to do some of the things that she's talking about. Yeah. What are some steps that they can take like immediately, things that they can do? Yeah.
So do a personal trust diagnostic so that you can see where your wobble is so that you can consciously overcome it.
And how do they do that personal trust diagnostic?
exactly the exercise I just did with you, although they can read it. It's in chapter 2 of the book, but it's literally come up with the last time you weren't trusted, diagnosis of authenticity, logic, or empathy. And then we give the prescriptions for how to overcome it. So identify your wobble and have the prescription to how to overcome it. And I'll even say this to your listeners. If the book isn't sufficient, contact me directly. In fact, you can contact me directly anyway. I'm on LinkedIn, but we tried to be completely exhaustive in this. And if we're not, tell me and I will help you overcome your wobble. The first thing to do is to overcome your trust wobble. The second thing I would say is that look at your organization and say, are there some types of people that thrive more than others? Are there systematic patterns of who thrives? And if there are, set out to begin to close those gaps. And I don't want to make thrive an amorphous thing. Thrive is like super easy. Achievement and sentiment. So the equivalent of HBS students' GPA and satisfaction, whatever that is in your company, if men are thriving more than women, if white employees are like wherever it is, if you have gaps, worry and take action. If you don't have gaps, don't worry about your culture. You're doing just fine.
Okay, identify the gaps. And I suppose next, close the gaps. That's where you start to do some of the investigative.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I love that advice. I think it's pretty actionable. I mean, the trust wobble, just that one concept, I think is super clear for people to get. So that's one of my favorite sections from the book, along with the 4 quadrants. So, I mean, maybe to wrap up, you can just let people know where can they go to get in touch with you. You mentioned you're on LinkedIn. Anything that you want to mention for people to check out, please feel free to do so.
Thank you. So yesterday was the book launch. So Unleashed, that beautiful book that you have. And Ariana Huffington was kind enough that on the front of the book, it says the definitive guide to leadership today. It's not in your version, but it's in the new version that came out.
Nice.
So Anne and I tried to put everything we know in here. So that's one way. LinkedIn, social media has scared me for my whole life. I just joined in January. I took my toe in the water in January. I'm on LinkedIn. I like it. So you can, I post there, and if you direct message me on LinkedIn, I respond to everything. So that's a great way to interact with me. And then if you're wondering like what's going on in my world, the Leader's Guide, and maybe we can share this, but the Leader's Guide is www.theleadersguide.com. That's where we put everything. So that's like the book website, and we put all of our resources there, sample chapter and things like that.
The Leader's Guide. I'm going to check that out too. Yeah. Okay, very cool. And congratulations on joining LinkedIn. That's a very big milestone.
It's a very big milestone. And so far it's been since January, and I have no wounds.
All right. I'm totally going to add you on LinkedIn right after we get off this.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me and share some of your advice and wisdom from the work you've been doing.
Yeah. And thank you for one, having the podcast, and two, thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, my guest has been Frances Frei. Check out her brand new book. It's called Unleashed. And I love the subtitle, The Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. And I'm sure I will see you all very, very soon. Thanks again for watching.